Welcome to TechNova Podcast.
All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into NVIDIA's latest and greatest, the RTX 5090.
Yeah, this one is quite the beast.
It's a two-slot card. It can handle over 575 watts.
Liquid metal cooling.
And it has this crazy flow-through design. But the real question is this $2,000 monster?
Yeah, $2,000.
Actually worth it? We've got all the data, benchmarks, thermal imaging, efficiency analysis.
The whole 9 yards.
So is it time to empty your wallets? Let's find out.
Well, it's definitely a powerhouse, no doubt. But with any new tech, we've got to cut through the hype and see if it really delivers.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks. Everyone wants to know performance.
Of course, that's the big one.
The RTX 5090 boasts a 20 to 50% performance increase over the 4090 in 4K rasterization.
Yeah, and about 27 to 35% for 4K ray tracing. Pretty impressive stuff.
Those are some serious numbers.
Yeah.
But there's a catch.
Always a catch.
It's also 25% more expensive than the 4090.
Yeah.
So is that performance boost worth the extra cash? Especially if you're not even gaming at 4K.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. I mean, imagine you're playing something like Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty.
Oh, yeah. Good example.
Or Dying Light 2.
Yeah.
You'll see some gains with the 5090.
Definitely.
But will you really feel the difference when you're actually playing?
That's what it comes down to, yeah. And is that feeling worth the extra cost?
Good point.
Got to weigh those pros and cons.
Okay, so maybe I'm not rushing to empty my wallet just yet, but how did they even manage to cram all this power into a two-slot design? That's insane.
Yeah, they basically worked some engineering magic.
Seriously, it's mind-blowing.
So they created a dual flow-through configuration. Offset the PCIe slot, used a separate I/O PCB to free up space.
Okay, I'm following so far.
Then they added a liquid metal cooling solution with a triple-walled gasket to keep everything running nice and cool.
Hold on, liquid metal? Did I hear that right?
You did.
That sounds a little scary, to be honest.
I mean, it sounds intimidating, but it's actually a very well-engineered solution.
Okay, so no need to wear a hazmat suit while I'm gaming.
No hazmat suit required. The triple-walled gasket does an excellent job of containing the liquid metal, so the risk of leaks is minimal.
That's good to hear. So it stays cool.
Incredibly cool. We're talking 72 degrees Celsius under load.
Wow, that's impressive.
And we've even got Schlieren imaging that shows just how effective this cooling system is.
Schlieren imaging.
It's a way to visualize airflow. Basically, you can see how the air bends and moves through the card thanks to that clever design.
So it's like watching air do gymnastics.
Kinda, yeah. It's really fascinating to see.
Okay, so we're talking about a symphony of airflow, all working together to keep this thing from melting down.
Exactly.
But I gotta ask, with all this power, what about my electricity bill? Is this thing gonna be a power hog?
Well, you're not wrong to be concerned about that.
I had a feeling.
The RTX 5090 is definitely power hungry. We're talking 46 watts idle power consumption, which is already pretty high. And when it's under load, it pushes the 12 VHPWR cable spec to its limits.
Okay, so maybe I do need a backup generator after all.
Well, maybe not a generator, but you definitely need a beefy PSU.
Right, so make sure your power supply can handle it.
Absolutely. You don't want to skimp on that. And another thing to consider, while the GPU itself stays cool, the memory temperatures are running a bit hot.
How hot are we talking?
Around 89 to 90 degrees Celsius.
That's not ideal.
It's something to keep in mind, especially if you have a case that traps heat or a small form factor PC.
So it's like they built this amazing cooling system for the GPU, and then the memory is just baking over there in the corner.
It is a bit of a trade-off for sure.
All right, so GPU stays cool, but the memory might get a little toasty. Anything else I should be worried about? Like the noises. Is this thing going to sound like a jet engine taking off?
Actually, no. It's surprisingly quiet. Our acoustic analysis shows a really well-balanced sound profile. No sharp peaks or whines. It's more of a gentle hum.
A gentle hum. Seriously?
Yeah, it's quite impressive.
So we're talking powerful, cool, and quiet. This is sounding better and better.
It's a pretty impressive package.
But what about efficiency? Did NVIDIA deliver on those promised efficiency gains over the 4090?
Well, technically, yes, it does show a slight improvement in some benchmarks, but the difference is really marginal. It's more like baby steps than a giant leap forward.
So not quite the energy revolution we were hoping for.
Not quite, but we do have to be cautious about those claims regarding efficiency improvements achieved through frame generation techniques.
Right, because those comparisons are a bit misleading.
Exact. It's not really an apples-to-apples comparison.
Okay, so efficiency, maybe not its strongest suit. But let's talk about something that really grinds my gears.
Yeah.
Misleading marketing. What about NVIDIA's claim of a 2x performance increase over the 4090? Our benchmarks tell a different story.
Yeah, their marketing definitely lacks transparency. They're relying on inflated performance claims and skewed comparisons to make the 5090 seem even more revolutionary than it is.
Come on, NVIDIA. You don't need to play those games. This
Mhm.
card is impressive enough on its own.
Agreed. It's a shame they're resorting to those tactics.
So where does this leave us? After all that, is this $2,000 behemoth, the RTX 5090, actually worth it?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And the answer really depends on what you need and what's important to you.
Okay, break it down for me.
If you're a gamer who absolutely has to have the best 4K ray tracing experience, no matter the cost, then maybe, just maybe, it's worth considering.
Oh.
But if you're playing at lower resolutions or you're on a tighter budget, there are definitely other options out there that might be a better fit for you.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
It is.
Yeah.
Amazing performance, innovative cooling, but it's power-hungry, potentially hot memory, and that price tag.
Yeah, that price tag is going to make a lot of wallets cry. This is getting complicated.
It is. But don't worry, we're going to break it down even further. Let's dive into some specific benchmarks and see how the 5090 stacks up against the competition. We'll also take a closer look at those memory temperatures and what you can do to mitigate any potential issues.
Sounds good to me. Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
All right, so let's jump into some benchmarks. How about we start with Final Fantasy XIV at 4K resolution?
Oh, yeah, that'll give us a good baseline.
The 5090 delivers a whopping 182 FPS on average.
182. Geez, my monitor can barely keep up with that. That's some serious firepower.
It is. And even more impressive, the 1% lows are practically on par with the 4090's average frame rate.
So even when things get really intense, it's still outperforming its predecessor.
Absolutely.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But, okay, let's not forget about that price difference. We're still talking about a 25% increase over the 4090. So is that extra performance, that 31%, actually worth the extra cost? Especially for a game like Final Fantasy XIV, which probably doesn't even need all 32 GB of that GDDR7 memory.
You make a good point. That massive amount of memory is definitely more geared toward professional applications.
Right.
For your average Final Fantasy player, the 5090 might be a bit overkill.
A bit, yeah. But what about a more demanding game? Something that really pushes the hardware to its limits.
Like Black Myth, Wukong.
Exactly. How does our little monster handle that at 4K?
Well, the 5090 really flexes its muscles there. It delivers an average of 86 FPS.
Okay, that's still pretty impressive.
And what's really remarkable is that its lowest 0.1% of frames are actually faster than the 4090's average frame rate.
Hold on, so even at its worst, it's still better than the 4090 on average.
Exactly. It's a testament to the raw power and the efficiency of the 5090's design.
All right, color me impressed. But what about AMD? Where do they fit into all of this? Can the 7900 XTX even compete?
Well, in Black Myth, Wukong, it falls behind, unfortunately. It only manages 49 FPS on average.
Ouch, that's a pretty big difference.
It is.
So for now, it seems like the 5090 is king of the hill.
It does appear that way, especially when you consider the incredible cooling solution they've implemented. They managed to fit all this power into a two-slot design and still keep the GPU remarkably cool.
Yeah, that liquid metal cooling and the Schlieren imaging. It's crazy.
It's an innovative approach and highly effective.
Yeah.
But we do need to remember those high memory temperatures we talked about. It's something to consider, especially for users who might not have the best case airflow.
Right, so great GPU cooling, but potentially toasty memory. Is there anything people can do about that?
Well, making sure you have good case ventilation is crucial.
Of course, yeah.
You could also consider using aftermarket cooling solutions specifically for the memory modules.
Like what?
There are heat sinks, active cooling fans, a few different options out there.
So maybe a little DIY project for the more adventurous user?
Exactly. But hey, at least the card itself runs pretty quietly.
That's true. I'd rather have slightly warmer memory than a GPU that sounds like a jet engine.
I hear you. And the acoustic analysis confirms that the 5090 is surprisingly quiet for a card this powerful.
So to recap, we've got impressive performance, innovative cooling, and it's relatively quiet. But let's talk about power consumption. Is this thing a power hog or what?
Well, it's not the most power-efficient card on the market. We measured a pretty high idle power consumption, about 46 watts.
46 watts just sitting there doing nothing. My old laptop probably used less power than that.
It's something to keep in mind when you're figuring out your power supply needs. And when it's under load, it can really push the 12E HPWR cable spec to the limit. You got to make sure your system can handle it.
Right, got to have that beefy power supply. We talked about that earlier. But what about the efficiency gains? Didn't NVIDIA make some big claims about that?
They did. And while there are some small gains in certain benchmarks, it's not a massive improvement. It's more of a shuffle sideways than a leap forward.
So not quite the energy revolution they were promised.
Ugh. Not quite. And remember, we have to be careful about those claims they make about efficiency improvements through frame generation.
Right, because those comparisons aren't really fair.
Exactly.
Okay, so maybe efficiency isn't its strong suit. But let's bring it back to the big question. Is the RTX 5090 worth that hefty price tag?
It's a tough one. We've seen that it delivers a significant performance boost, especially at 4K and with ray tracing, but that performance comes at a cost, both literally and figuratively.
Literally the price.
Oh,
Figuratively, the power consumption and those potential memory temperature issues. It's a lot to think about.
it is. The decision really comes down to your individual needs and priorities. If you're the kind of gamer who needs the absolute best 4K ray tracing experience, no matter what, then maybe it's worth considering. But for people playing at lower resolutions or who are more budget conscious, there are other options out there that might make more sense.
So it's a niche product aimed at a specific audience. Power users, enthusiasts, people who demand the best and are willing to pay for it. But for the average gamer, it might be a bit overkill.
It's all about choosing the right tool for the job. And sometimes that tool is a super-powered, liquid, metal-cooled monster GPU. And sometimes it's something a little more modest.
Well said. And let's not forget about those misleading marketing tactics from NVIDIA. That whole 2x performance increase claim that turned out to be a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, their lack of transparency and reliance on skewed comparisons is definitely a concern.
It's like they don't trust that the 5090 can stand on its own merits, which is a shame because it's a genuinely impressive piece of hardware. But hey, maybe AMD will shake things up a bit soon with their next-gen GPUs and those promised improvements in ray tracing.
We can hope. Competition is always good. It drives innovation and hopefully leads to better products at better prices.
More choices, better performance, and hopefully less misleading marketing. A gamer can dream, right?
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to dive into some specific examples of the 5090's performance in a few popular games. I think it'll give our listeners a clearer picture of what this card can really do.
Sounds good to me. Let's see what this beast can handle. Okay, let's get into some real-world examples here. Let's say you're playing Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty at 4K resolution with all the ray tracing goodness cranked up. How does the 5090 handle that?
Well, with ray tracing set to ultra, the 5090 manages a pretty respectable 53 FPS on average.
53 FPS. Not too shabby considering we're talking 4K with all the eye candy turned on. How does that compare to the 4090?
In the same scenario, the 4090 only gets about 39 FPS, so we're looking at a 35% performance uplift with the 5090.
Okay, so pretty noticeable difference there. For those who want the absolute best visuals, the 5090 is the way to go. What if we tone down the ray tracing a little bit, just to see how it performs when it's not being pushed to the max?
Good idea. With ray tracing set to medium, the 5090 jumps up to 59 FPS, while the 4090 hits around 40, so the performance gap gets even bigger, almost 50%.
Wow, that's a pretty compelling argument for the 5090. But you know, not everyone has the latest and greatest hardware. What about those of us still rocking a 2080 Ti? How does that card fare in this benchmark?
Ugh, the 2080 Ti, a classic. Well, in this Cyberpunk benchmark, with ray tracing set to ultra at 4K, it only manages a rather painful 8.8 FPS on average.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. I guess it really shows how quickly technology moves forward.
It does.
So it all comes down to choosing the right GPU for your needs and budget.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the RTX 5090. Who is this card really for? We've covered a lot of ground, but who should actually consider buying this thing?
Yeah, it's a big investment, and it's not without its downsides. So who really benefits from the 5090's power and features?
Well, it really comes down to those who demand the absolute best performance no matter the cost. Gamers who want that top-tier 4K experience with all the settings maxed out, and professionals who can really make use of that 32 GB of VRAM.
So video editors, 3D modelers, AI developers, those kinds of folks.
Exactly. For them, the 5090 can be a real game changer. But for the average gamer who maybe plays a few hours after work,
Right.
probably not the best choice.
It's overkill, basically.
Yeah, there are more budget-friendly options out there that will provide a great experience without breaking the bank.
It's all about finding the right tool for the job, as they say.
Couldn't agree more.
And sometimes that tool is a super-powered, liquid, metal-cooled beast of a GPU. And sometimes it's something a little more, shall we say, down to earth.
It all depends on what you need and what you're willing to spend.
Well said. So to wrap things up, the RTX 5090 is a beast of a GPU. It's powerful, it's innovative, and it can deliver an amazing experience. But it's not for everyone. You've really got to think about your needs, your budget, and your priorities before taking the plunge.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Do your research, read the reviews, and don't be swayed by hype.
That's right. The best GPU for you is the one that fits your specific requirements, not necessarily the one with the biggest price tag or the flashiest specs.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Be sure to check back for more deep dives into the world of PC hardware and gaming tech.
We'll be covering CPUs, motherboards, peripherals, all sorts of cool stuff. Until then, happy gaming!